All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei 5785, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shurim and drashos this year as a zuchos for Besoros Tovos, for all of Am Yisrael and Yetz Hashem Bekarov. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in memory of her husband, Peretz Moshe ben Avram David, and Avram and Shindi Kalman, in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kalman, and Alexander and Frederica David. Our Week of Learning sponsors, Rabiel and Natalie Amirian, in memory of Dr. Nahid Nili Esther Bas Malek Zichron Livracha, on the occasion of her yard site. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas, Shav and Aliyah, all of the families in Nechama, we should be Zochem Eretz Hashem to return of our hostages, Bekarov, and the success of our holy soldiers, Bechol Maaseh Yedehem. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Kuf Chav Ches 128. We are picking up on Kuf Chav Zayin 127b, and let's actually pick up again with the case of Rabbi Yochanan. So it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Yochanan. We actually did this first case at the end of yesterday's shir, but we'll just pick up with it again. Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Bnihu, the Chazer Amar Avdihu. What happens if a man says, "This is my son"? Right. So you have Yaakov, and Yaakov, when referring to Ruvain, says, "This man, this boy, Ruvain, he is my son." And then he goes ahead and he retracts it again, and he says, "This is my Eved. This is my servant." So the halacha is, Einon Eman, he is not believed. He's not believed. Now we saw the Rashbam yesterday, and the Rashbam said that again. What's his logic? His logic was, in other words, Yaakov's claim is, he's really my Eved, but I love him like a son. Okay, so the Gemara says, however, again, that's strange because a person wouldn't normally go ahead and call their Eved their son. Avdihu v'chazav amar benihu ne'eman. But if a person goes in and first says, "This is my Eved," and then he goes in and he says, "This is my son," he is believed. Now, what's the logic there? Because what he's saying is, my son is so dutiful that he serves me like an Eved. Okay. Now the opposite of this would be true when it comes to Beis HaMechas literally means the tax house. When it comes to taxes, now this is fascinating. Meaning what? Over Beis HaMechas. Let's say a person is going through the I guess we'll call it like the toll booth, the tax collection station, and Yaakov is walking with Ruvain, right? And Yaakov says, "Va'amar benihu v'chazer va'amar avdihu ne'eman." So Yaakov is walking with Ruvain through the tax collection station, and as he's walking through, he claims, "This is my son." And then later on he claims, "This is my Eved." He's believed. Now why is that? So apparently, again, you would not pay taxes on additional household members, but you would pay taxes for staff. Meaning, so in other words, if I have an Eved, I have to pay the tax on my Eved. My children, I don't have to pay taxes on. So this is fascinating. So when Yaakov is walking through Ruvain, and they walk through the tax house, or the tax station, so if Yaakov were to claim that Ruvain is his son, and then later on were to claim, "No, he's really my Eved," he's believed. Now why is he believed? Because we assume that he just claimed that Ruvain was his son. Why? To avoid taxes, right? Tax exemption. He wants tax write-off. Right? So therefore, again, but he's believed to qualify that statement afterwards. On the other hand, Amar Avdihu, the Chazava Amar Benihu Eino Ne'eman. But if halacha l'maaseh, he says that Ruvain is his Eved, and then he goes in and claims that he's his son, he's not believed. That doesn't make any sense. Now, why doesn't that make sense? Because halacha l'maaseh, by claiming it's his Eved, that already generates a tax liability. So again, if he was really your son, you should have claimed he was your son. The fact that you claimed that he was the Eved, and now you have to pay taxes, and now you recant that to say that your son, he's not believed. Okay, supposed to say, so again, just what is this whole discussion? So remember again, this is a derivative discussion of our previous machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim disagreed about whether or not a father has the ability to articulate or to identify who is his bechar, even in the face of an opposing chazaka. So remember again, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion of Yakir, that a father has complete credibility to go ahead and identify who is his bechar. Even if there's a chazaka that points in a different direction, the father is still believed. The Chum say, no, a father is believed in the absence of any pre-existing chazaka. But once there is a chazaka which points in the direction of another son, so a father is not believed to challenge that particular chazaka. So again, this is is a derivative discussion. So Rabbi Yochanan coming along and saying, you called a particular person an Eved, then you called him a son, you called him an Eved. In which cases are you believed to go ahead and change identity, and in which cases are you not? So listen to the same case. There's Yaakov, right? And Yaakov is accompanied by Reuven. Reuven is serving Yaakov like a son, in the capacity of a son. And then what happens? First white line, and then Yaakov goes ahead and says that this son isn't really a son, this is my servant. Yaakov is not believed. On the other hand, if Reuven was serving Yaakov like an Eved. So the Rashbam points out over here, for example, I will say again, so there are certain things that a son would do, right? A son would feed his father, clothe his father. Other things that an Eved would do, which would be more menial. So again, if Yaakov is accompanied by Reuven, and ultimately again, Reuven is serving Yaakov like a son, and then Yaakov goes ahead and says, he's really my Eved, he's not believed. Yaakov is not believed. On the other hand, but if Reuven was serving Yaakov like an Eved, and then Yaakov comes along and says that he's really my right? And Yaakov says he's my Eved, and then ultimately again, I'm sorry, I read it the first part wrong. I'm sorry. Meisvei. Hayimshamsho kiben. Right? Let's read that once more. Yaakov, right? Reuven was serving Yaakov like a son. And then what happens? Ubav va'amar bnihu. And Yaakov said, this is my son. V'chazar va'amar avdihu. And then he said, right? Then he changed his position. He said, this is my Eved. So, Eino Ne'eman. So in that case, Yaakov is not believed. Hayimshamsho ke'eved. Because I will say, remember again, there's two things happening in that case. Number one, Reuven is serving Yaakov like a son. That's one. And number two, Yaakov said, he's my son. Then Yaakov changes his mind and says, he's my Eved. He's not believed. Similarly again, if Reuven was serving Yaakov like an Eved, and Yaakov said, Reuven is my Eved, and then Yaakov changes his mind and he says, he's my son, Eino Ne'eman. Ultimately, again, he is not believed. Yaakov is not believed. So the Gemara says, so what do you see from there? What you see from these particular cases is that halacha l'maisa, once identity is established, you can't change it. You can't change it. So that contradicts what we said before. The case is different over there. Hasam dekarle avda meitzar meya. It's different because there Yaakov called Reuven, literally again, the literal translation over here is an Eved who is meitzar meya, is a boundary of 100. So the Gemara says, my meitzar meya, what does that mean, meitzar meya? The Gemara says, my meitzar meya, meitzar avda kof zuzi, that he's an Eved who is worth 100 zuz. So we'll say, so once you refer to someone as an Eved worth 100 zuz, then by definition, again, you can't flip-flop. In other words, you don't talk that way about a son, you would only talk that way about an Eved. So once a lashon like that is used, everyone agrees that that becomes an irreversible designation. Okay, so we'll say, so the point over here is we continue to see this tension about the ability of someone to establish someone else's identity, right? So it began ultimately with the case of a father and his firstborn son. Does a father have the ability to identify his firstborn child, even when perhaps that identity has, or I should say, even when the firstborn child has been circumstantially identified in other ways? Does a father have ultimate right to say, this is my firstborn son, and is his word considered to be authoritative in that context? Rabbi Huda says no. Chachamim say no, yes, maybe, sometimes. In other words, that father does have that ability, but not necessarily, but only when the father's statement is not contradicted by other circumstantial reality. Rabbi Yochanan, a man has an ability to go ahead and identify someone as his son and someone as an Eved, but this seems to be much more in line with the position of the Chachamim, because that man's word, in this case it was Yaakov, that man's word is taken as truth only when it makes sense in the given context. All right, beautiful. Let's go back there. Shalach le Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama ha'omer lechavero avdi ganaftas. Interesting case. Reuven says to Shimon, right? Reuven says to Shimon, Shimon, you stole my eved. V'hu omer lo ganafti. Shimon says, no, I didn't. Shimon says, no, I didn't. So Reuven says to Shimon, well, if you didn't steal my eved, then why is my eved in your house? Ma tivo etzlecha. Then why is my eved with you? Shimon says, I'll tell you why. Ata machartali. Right? Well, I'll tell you why your eved is with you. You sold it to me. Top of Kuf Chavches 128a. Atana satli matana, or you gave it to me as a gift. In other words, Shimon is agreeing that the eved that is in his house used to belong to Reuven. But whereas Reuven is claiming that Shimon stole it from him, Shimon is saying, you sold it to me or you gifted it to me. So listen to this. So Shimon says to Reuven, listen, I don't want any machlokes. Ritzoncha hishava v'tol. So listen to this. So Shimon says to Reuven, listen, if you swear that you did not sell it to me, or you did not gift it to me, and that you swear that I stole it from you, I'll give it back to you. I'll give it back to you. So again, this is a fascinating case because over here, remember both sides. If this case came before you, right? You be the dayan. Reuven and Shimon show up in your basin. What would you say? What would you say? Like this is like a very simple case. In other words, that at the end of the day, if Reuven, you want to prove that it's yours, right? Remember again, possession is not 9/10 of the law, 9.9/10 of the law. So at the end of the day, Shimon has it. Reuven, you want to claim that it's yours? Okay, go prove it. Go prove it. But just a verbal statement is not enough. But yet in this case, interestingly enough, Shimon is like, listen, Reuven, if you really believe that you're correct, swear, and if you swear that it's really yours, I'll give it back to you. Okay, so what happens now? If you're Shimon, you're probably thinking to yourself, what? What are you thinking to yourself? He's not going to swear. He's not going to swear because he sold it to me. Meanwhile, what happens? So the Gemara says, Inu yochel lachzor bo v'nishma. So now Reuven swears. Reuven swears. Now I will say this is fascinating because remember again, this is not a court-mandated oath, right? This is not a shvuah that was mandated by Beis Din. This is Shimon. It almost sounds like trying to call Reuven's bluff a little bit. Okay, you think it's really yours? Take out a Sefer Torah and swear. Well, Reuven does it. So the Gemara says, Ein yochel lachzor bo. Now Shimon can't say, you know what, I changed my mind. You know, I'm really keeping it. Let's go to Beis Din. Once Shimon offered that route and Reuven took it, Shimon can't pull it back. And therefore, again, if Reuven were to take the oath, Shimon would have to go ahead and return it to him. If you take a quick look at the Rashbam says, Inu yochel. It's about 8 lines into the shorter lines. In other words, so Shimon can't say, Reuven, I was just kidding around. I didn't really mean that I was going to give you back the Eved. I just meant if you felt so strongly, take a shvuah, make yourself feel better. But I wasn't really going to return it to you. So Shimon doesn't have the ability to say that. Rather, once he gave Reuven that option, and Reuven exercised that option, Shimon can't pull it back. Back to the Gemara. So Makamash Malan. So the Gemara says, what's the chiddush over here? Tanina, we learned this. So we'll say essentially what we're going to see is like this. Any time in halacha that you offer something to the other party, even though under normal circumstances what you're offering would not be legally binding or maybe even sometimes legally permissible, but you offer it as a route of conflict resolution, once you put that out there, you can't pull it back. That's the idea. So the Gemara gives examples of this. You'll learn this. Amar lo, ne'aman alai abba. So we'll say, so let's say again, I have a machlokes with Reuven. Right? So what happens? Reuven has Eidos, but who happens to be the aid over here? Reuven's father. Now normally Reuven's father would not be a permitted aid in any legal dispute that I'm having with Reuven because he's a car. But let's say I say, Reuven, you know what? I'm happy to have your father's testimony admissible. Your father is a credible guy. I'm happy to believe him. Right? Ne'aman alai abba. Or Ne'aman... I'm sorry, my father. The Gemara says, Ne'aman alai avicha, sorry. Ne'aman alai, first I say, I'm happy to rely on my father's testimony, right? Or Ne'aman alai avicha, or your father. Ne'aman alai shlosha roi bakar. Or, let's go to a Beis Din. Who do you want on the Beis Din? I'm happy to use those 3 shepherds over there. In other words, that obviously what I'm saying is, I'm willing to rely on an Einer in Beis Din. Rabbi Meir Omer Yochel Lachzor bo. Rabbi Meir says, in all of these cases, halacha l'maisa, you could recant, you could retract this. Now, Rabbi Meir's logic is, take a look at the second wide of the intermediate lines, Yochel Lachzor bo, or the third one, the Dvarim ba'alma below kinyan of the Kamerle, because these are just words. these are just words. And because they're just words and they're not accompanied by any formal kinyan that would solidify them, therefore again I could retract them. The Chum say no, the Chum say you can't retract it. In other words, no. Once you put this out there, the Rashbam says over once you put this out there and you accept this approach as a possibility for conflict resolution, you're bound by it. Once you put it out there, you're bound by it. So now both say, the Gemara says, so what's the chiddush? So now let's circle back, right? So what did I say? All right, Reuven says to Shimon, Shimon, you stole my Evan. Shimon says, no, I didn't. You sold it to me, or you gifted it to me. So Shimon sees that Reuven is all hot under the challah. So Shimon says, fine, swear that it's really yours, and I'll give it back to you. Sure enough, thinking that Reuven is not going to swear. Sure enough, Reuven swore, right? Reuven swears, and again, the halacha now is Shimon can't say, I was just kidding around. I'm not giving you back the Evan. Rather, Shimon has the honor the Shavua and giving back the Eves. The Gemara says, what's the Chiddush? We learned this already. This is the position of the Chachamim, that once you obligate yourself in something, even though again this is of a compromised legal standing, if you put it out there and you accepted it, you're bound by it. So what's the Chiddush? The Gemara says, Hakamash Malon. So we'll say the difference in our case over here is if you look in all these other cases, what I'm doing is I'm willing to commit myself to a legal proceeding that would not normally be a bona fide legal proceeding. 3 shepherds, right? Your father, my father. I haven't committed to giving anything. Right? In our case over here, Shimon is committing to give something. I might have thought that again, such a statement like that would not be binding. Kamash Malon, even in that case, the Chachamim would say that Shimon's statement is binding. And also, by the way, the Gemara says we paskin like the Chachamim. So I'll say it's really interesting. And there's a logic to it. In other words, the halacha says that a legal proceeding or a legal mechanism should look like this, and there's a box. If you decide to commit yourself to something outside of the box, you have the right to. In other words, in general, in any type of conflict resolution, if you want to commit yourself to something that the halacha says we don't really like this, but if you're willing to commit yourself to an inferior process, okay, if you're committed, you're committed. Just understand, once you commit yourself to that, there's no out. Once you've committed, you've committed. Okay, incredible. Shalach Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama. Halacha Govin min abadim. Suppose to say another interesting halacha. Suppose to say, so now what we're going to see are a series of statements by Rabbi Abba. So the first one is as follows. Rabbi Abba said as follows. Halacha Govin min abadim. Now what's this case of Govin min abadim? If you look at the Rashbam says it's in the widest lines, 4 lines in Govin min abadim. Balchov shemeis Gova me avdei yisum. So we'll say now watch this. Yaakov died. He left behind sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And Yaakov also left behind debts. So remember again, we know that normally the halacha is that creditors could collect from the estate of the deceased, which is now the estate of the orphans. The estate belongs to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now remember again, the debts of the estate are capped by the amount of the assets of the estate. Remember, right? Yisomim orphans can never be personally liable for the debts of their father. Now what Rabbi Abba is introducing is the same way that creditors of Yaakov, Zichrono Livracha, could go ahead and collect from his real property. They could also collect from his avadim. And it's not a chiddush. It makes a lot of sense. Why? Because an eved in general in halacha is treated like what? Treated like karka. So therefore, again, Yaakov, Zichrono Livracha's creditors could collect from the avodim of his estate. Okay. Rav Nachman says, in Govin, Rav Nachman says, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Creditors cannot collect from avodim. Now, what's the logic? If you look at the Rashbam says, Dinehi de iskish lekarkos dechsev v'isnachaltem hanim l'dvar maksuv b'torah kigon l'knosan b'kesef shtar b'chazaka v'shol l'shav alein v'she'ein bahen ono aval le'inyan balchov kimataltali dami. So Rav Nachman disagrees. And Rav Nachman says, no. While it's true that avodim are compared to karka, that compared to karka, that's only for biblical matters. It's not true for debt. It's not true for debt. Now, it's actually interesting. What's the machlokes over here? The idea of why is it that karka is used to secure debt? Why is that? Because karka, real estate, is dependable. Right? It's dependable. It's there. It's not going anywhere. So therefore, again, in a regular case of a loan, when let's say again, when Yitzchak lent Yaakov Zichron Livracha money, so Yitzchak had his debt secured by Yaakov's real property. And he knows that that is a stable source of potential repayment. So again, Rabbi Abba says, well, an Eved is compared to Karka, and therefore Aloha L'maisa, repayment could come from Avadim as well. Rav Nachman says, no. A creditor does not rely on repayment from Avadim. Why not? Why not? Avadim are people. People die, and people are, therefore an Eved is not a stable potential future source of repayment. So fundamentally, it's interesting. So in other words, everyone is agreeing that an Eved is compared to Karka. The question just is, how far do we take that comparison? Rabbi Abba says even for repayment purposes. Rav Nachman says only for other items mentioned biblically. In other words, manners of acquisition, of ona, things like that, but not for repayment of a debt. Okay, next. Shalach le Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef. So again, we'll see the halacha in all these cases. Shalach le Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef. Bar Chama. Halacha shlishi b'sheni kasher. So we'll say some interesting halachas over here. So Rabbi Abba sends Rabbi Yosef the following halacha. So literally, shlishi b'sheni means a first cousin once removed is permitted to give eidos. Okay, Rava Amar Af Berishon. Rava says even a great uncle is permitted to give eidos. Mar Baravashi Achsher Ba'aba Da'aba. Mar Baravashi said even a grandfather, right, is permitted to go ahead and give testimony about a grandson. V'les Hilchasal Kamar Baravashi. But whereas we accept the previous two opinions that technically speaking a first cousin once removed and even a great uncle could give eidos, a grandfather combination cannot give. In other words, not a combination, but a grandfather can't give eidos about a grandson, and vice versa is true as well. And what's the logic? Well, that's Hilchasa Kamar Baravashi. The halacha doesn't follow Ma'abar Ravashi, namely, grandfather can't give testimony about grandson, and vice versa is true as well. The Rashbam says, why is that? To b'nei banim b'nei banim ad elef doros lo ya'idu. He'll say again, father, grandfather, great grandfather, great great grandfather, till 1,000 generations. If it's a direct son after son, cannot give eidos. Why? The Rashbam says, the ben yerech avafu. Because interestingly enough, a son, grandson, great-grandson, or even a great-great-grandson are all considered to be sons. So therefore, interestingly enough, it sounds like we're accepting the fact that a first cousin once removed can give eidos, or an uncle, great-uncle, technically can give eidos, but any ben achar ben, any father after son relationship can never give eidos for each other. Okay, Shalach Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama. Hayodeh lo li eidos karka ad shelo nistama. So we'll say some interesting cases over here. So let's say Ruvain knew some information about property that was important for Shimon. See, he had eidos about a certain piece of property that would benefit Shimon. And now what happens? He knew this eidos achlo nistama until he became blind. Then he went blind. The problem is now at the time when he's being called upon to give eidos, he's blind, right? Vinistama, puzzle. So as a blind person, he can't give eidos because bepashtas he's unable to identify, right, the particular boundaries of the land. He's unable to identify the particular parcel that he's testifying about. Shmuel says, no, kosher. As long as Ruvain had sight, right, at some point, and therefore again we know that he knows the information that he's testifying about, he can testify even as a blind man. Why? Because he could still identify the boundaries. In other words, even if he's not sighted right now, if he remembers the boundaries of the particular parcel, he is believed to give testimony. Aval glima lo. But when it comes ultimately again to the testimony about a cloak, a blind person would not be believed. Because the assumption is that in order to identify a particular cloak, you need sight. The Gemara says, Rav Sheshet says, no. Afilu glima. That's not true even by a cloak. A person who had sight and then became blind is permitted to give testimony. Why? He can identify the cloak by identifying the specific length and width. I will say, so you have to appreciate something. This is before the days of mass production, which means that when you were making cloaks by hand, so Lamaisa, you never had two cloaks that were exactly the same length and width. And therefore, Halacha Lamaisa, length and width would be a good siman. So as long as Reuven had sight at some point in time, saw the length and width, he'd be believed even if he lost sight. Aval naskalo, when it comes to a metal bar or a silver bar, a bar of silver, then he would not be believed. Why? Because a bar of silver ultimately could be mass produced. The Papa says, no, even by a bar of silver, you would never have two bars of silver that are exactly the same weight, right? Why not? Because first of all, it just didn't happen that way, and also because over time, wear and tear, some of the silver ends up eroding as well. Okay, so therefore, again, the Gemara will say in these cases, what's interesting over here is this also, just to tell you the progression, right? So Rabbi Abba said as follows. Rabbi Abba's statement was that halacha l'maisa, if Reuven Reuven had sight and knew about a particular field. Then some type of legal proceeding came up that involved Shimon, and Shimon needed Reuven to give testimony about that field. But by the time that Reuven is ready to give testimony, Reuven is blind. He lost his sight. Rabbi Abba said that if he doesn't have sight at the time that he needs to give testimony, he cannot give the testimony. Then there was a machlokes about that, right? Shmuel disagreed, Rav Sheshes disagreed, Rav Papa, and the common between Shmuel, Rav Papa, Rav Sheshes, and Rav Papa is that they all felt that even a person who is currently blind could give eidos as long as he acquired the necessary information when he was sighted. Right? So Rabbi Abba essentially saying a blind person cannot give eidos even if he had sight at a certain point and was able to acquire the information. All of these other Rabbanim saying no, a blind person can give eidos as long as he had sight at a particular time and therefore was able to acquire the necessary information. So Gemara raised a kasha. So meisvei hayodeh lo beeidos ad shlo naseh chasno v'naseh chasno. It's an interesting case. So remember again, normally, a son-in-law, right, son-in-law, father-in-law, are not allowed to give testimony for each other. Pasala eidos. So let's say again, you have Yaakov, right? And Yaakov knew eidos for Lavan, right? Before he became Lavan's son-in-law. And now he marries Rachel, and he becomes Lavan's son-in-law. Or someone was able to speak, right? They knew Eidos and then they became mute. Or Pisach v'nistama, someone had sight and then they became blind. Shafoy v'nishtata, someone was of sound mind and then they became a shota. In all of these cases, puzzle. So we'll say, so what the Bryce is saying is like this. In order to be able to give Eidos, you have to have proper status at the time the Eidos is being given. It doesn't matter the fact that you have proper status at the time that you learned the information, right? If you don't have proper status at the time that we need you to convey the eidos, you're pasala eidos. You're pasala eidos. On the other hand, aval hayodeh lo beeidos ad shlo naseh chasno v'naseh chasno umei sabito. What happens in the following situation? Let's say Yaakov knows testimony for Lavan. Then he marries Rachel. He becomes Lavan's son-in-law. Then Rachel dies. So once again, Yaakov is no longer Lavan's son-in-law. Or Pikeach, someone was able to speak. V'nis charish, then he became mute. V'chazav v'nis pakach, and then he was able to speak again. Or pisach v'nis tama, or someone had sight, he lost his sight. V'chazav v'nis patach, and then he had sight again. Or shafoy, he was cognitively normal, right? What happens? V'nishtata, then he became shota. V'chazav v'nishtapa, and then he became normal again. What's talacha? Kosher. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, what's the rule? Zaklal. Kol shetchilasa osofo bepaslos pasal. So we'll say the halacha is like this. Any person who either started out as a pasal or is currently a pasal is pasal eidos. So in other words, what does that mean? If at the time you saw the information, right, you were not in a state in which you were fit to give eidos, or currently at the time that we need you to give the eidos, you are not fit to give eidos, then you're not good for eidos. So I'll say, for our purposes, what this means is as follows. So obviously, if somebody was blind, at the time of the event, it's not going to help. But what the chiddush over here for us is as follows. Even if a person was sighted, but now they're blind, or a person was single, now they're married, so again, the edus is about their father-in-law, or again, they were healthy, and they had speech, and now they're mute, right? In all of these cases, in order to give edus, you have to be fit to give edus at the time that the edus is being requested of you. It is not enough to have been fit at the time of the event, right? You have to be fit at the time of the conveyance. So if you were either puzzle at the time of the event or puzzle at the time of the conveyance that we need you to give over the edus, your edus is no good. On the other hand, tchilasa v'sofa b'kashra is kosher. But if at the other hand, if halacha l'maisa, you were fit at the time of the event, and you are fit at the time of the conveyance, right? Even though you were unfit in between, we don't care. We don't care. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, in order to give eidos, you have to be a kosher aid at the time that we need you to testify. Right? Just because you were fit at the time when you saw the information, that is not enough. You need to be a proper aid at the time of the conveyance. What does this show you? Amud beis tiyufta, Amud beis tiyufta dekulu tiyufta. So we'll say this effectively refutes Rav Sheshes or Shmuel, Rav Sheshes, and Rav Papa. Because remember again, Rabbi Abba was the one who held by this principle that in order to give eidos, you have to be fit for eidos at the time of the conveyance. Shmuel, Rav Sheshes, and Rav Papa felt that as long as you were fit at the time of the event, even if you're not fit at the time of the conveyance, you're still kosher. Brisa refutes all three of those opinions to his effective refutation. I will say that is how we pass halacha l'maisa. In order to give eidos, you have to be a fit aid at the time of the event and the time of the conveyance. Now, if you had circumstances in between, so l'maisa, we don't care so much about that. What we care is about how you are at the beginning and how you are at the end. I will say it's a beautiful and incredible metaphor for life. Right? In other words, that we all start out the same way, and we all start out holy, we all start out pure. That's how the beginning is. We start out with kashrus, right? Remember again, when we come into this world, we are all tzaddikim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the shvua. Remember again, what is the Gemara Maseches Nida? The shvua is Tihi tzaddik va'al tihi rasha. Be righteous and don't be evil. We all come into this world pure, pristine, holy, same shvua. They will say, what's the goal? What's the goal? What's the goal? The goal is close out life in the same way. What about all the stuff in between? Don't worry about it. As long as you close it out in the right way. I will say, what an incredible, see, sometimes we think that to ourselves, you know what, I've done so much stuff. There's so much garbage in my life. Like, I am forever tainted. I am forever compromised. I'm broken. No matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to right this ship. The Gemara says, it's not true. The truth is, as long as you know the beginning is pure, as long as you could close it out in a good way, whatever the stuff in the middle is, it's all right. Don't worry about it. The goal, I will say, is just like, don't make the middle too long, right? In other words, it's not just a pshat that like, okay, on my deathbed, I'll close it out. The goal is like, the middle should be the stuff that's the past, and now this is the beginning. It's going to sound ominous, but this is the beginning of my end. But a good end. In other words, that like, I'm ready to start the new chapter that is the chapter from now until the end of my life. This is my new chapter. What about all the stuff in the middle? Who cares? Who cares? That's not, in other words, we'll say what I'm looking for in life is tchilasa b'kashrus, v'sofa b'kashrus. That's what I need. The stuff in the middle, don't worry about it. My sof, my end, this last chapter of my life starts now and goes until the end. And as long as I can maintain my kashrus for that period, anything that happened between my birth and now really becomes totally inconsequential. What a message of chizuk. And I will say, the great part is, you could use that as many times as you want, right? So in other words, I'm using it today, I'm probably going to have to use it again tomorrow, right? Tomorrow is going to be a new beginning of the end. The next day is probably going to be a new beginning. You can use it as many times as you want. And as long as you close out this journey of life, b'kedusha b'tara, all the stuff that happens in the middle really becomes inconsequential. Incredible. Shalach Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef. Chamo. So remember again, this is all Rabbi Abba, right? So Rabbi Abba sent Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama. Ha'omer al tinok ben abanim ne'aman. So listen to this. So if a person says, Rabbi say, now this is actually Rabbi Huda, right? So this is Yaakov has a bunch of sons, and Yaakov says, Reuven, he's my bachar. So the halacha is, okay, Yaakov is believed. Yaakov is believed to identify his son as a bachar. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Ne'aman. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he's not believed. He's not believed. Now again, Rabbi Yochanan must be talking about a case where we have a chazaka that Shimon is the bachar, not Ruvain. So comes along Rabbi Yochanan says, no. If there's a chazaka that another kid is the bachar, the father is not believed, just to make a statement that contradicts the chazaka. So the verse is my kamar. Well, I understand what exactly is being said over here. Amar Abaye Sach kamar. Ha'omer al tinok ben abanim yiresh kon l'chasei ne'aman Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. So Rabbi Yochanan says like this. Really, what Rabbi Abba is saying is like this. If a father says that I want this son to inherit all of my property, so then ultimately again the father is believed. Now I will say, now b'pashtos, we saw this before. How would that work? If a father wants one son, right? Let's say again Yaakov has 3 sons, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yaakov decides, I want Reuven to inherit all of my property. So how could Reuven do that? How could Yaakov do that? How does he do it? A gifted. So remember again, you could do that. Halacha l'maaseh, and it would work. Because the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Eino ne'eman kiraban. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you can't do that. Because halacha l'maaseh again, a father doesn't have the ability to undermine the chazaka. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Maskeva Rava, if that's the case, Hai ne'eman b'hai eino ne'eman, yirash v'lo yirash me'vaylei. Then the lashon shouldn't be a father is believed or a father is not believed. Rather, the lashon should be a particular son does inherit or doesn't inherit. So the Gemara says, Allah Amar Rava is like this. Sachakar means to say, Ha'omer al tinok bein habanim b'charhu. Rather, what it means is like this. If a father, going back to our original assumption, if a father, right, so you've got Yaakov is a father, he's got 3 sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now, we've always assumed, the chazaka has always been that Reuven is the bachar. So now what happens? A father comes along and says, no, Shimon is the bachar, Ne'eman. Ultimately, again, so Rabbi Abba is saying that Allah the father is believed. Whose opinion is that? Rabbi Huda. That's Rabbi Huda. Right, so I will say that's the position of Rabbi Huda, that a father, Yakir Oso, that was the drush, Yakir Oso, a father always has the right to identify who is the Bachar. On the other hand, Rabbi Yochanan says, Eino ne'eman. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he's not believed in. Who does Rabbi Yochanan hold like the Rabbanan. Okay, so again, in this last exchange over here, Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Yochanan are essentially rehashing the machlokes Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Abba holds like Rabbi Huda, that a father always has the right to identify who his Bechor is, even if that paternal identification undermines a previously established chazaka. And Rabbi Yochanan holds like the Rabbanan, that a father has the ability to establish who his Bechor is in the absence of any previously established chazaka. But if there's a previously established chazaka, father is not believed. Incredible. Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama. Ha'omer titol ishti ke'echam min abanim notaz ke'echam min abanim. It's an interesting case. Rabbi Abba said, if a man says, right, so Yaakov is married to Rachel, and Yaakov says, I want Rachel to inherit like one of my sons. So he wants to give Rachel an additional portion on the estate. So Rashbam has an interesting case over here. The Rashbam says, if you look, Titol Ishti Kishti Echamin Abanim v'Kabla Shenitzratzis Kidul Kamam Perikin Inami Lebar Miksuvas and Asalachal. So say so. Either what the Rashbam says, it could be talking about a case where, let's say she's receiving a portion on the estate instead of her ksuva, or in addition to her ksuva, right? But she accepts this, whatever it is, right? So what's the halacha? So Rabbi Abba says, if a husband does this, Yaakov does this, it works. Amar Rava, u'benechasim shel achshav. Rava says, however, it only applies to any possessions that Yaakov currently owns, right? In other words, it doesn't apply to any future possessions. Statement like that only applies to what's held right now. However, but it will impact ultimately not only sons who Yaakov has now, but even sons who are born later. Okay, incredible. Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chama. So we'll say again, all Rabbi Abba. Hamotzi shtarchov al chaveiro. All right, so this is a fascinating case. So listen to this. Reuven has a loan document, right? And in the loan document it says, I, Reuven, lent Shimon $100,000. Okay. Fine. So now Reuven takes out the loan document. Malva Omer lo nifreti klum. So what happens? So the lender, Ruvain, says, and you owe me money, $100,000. You didn't pay me back anything. Listen to this. Velo ve'omer parati mechza. Shimon says, not true. I paid you back $50,000. I paid you back $50,000. Va'idim me'idim shepara kulo. Whoa, I never heard a case like this. The witnesses say, no, Shimon paid back the whole amount. See, hear what's happening over here? Reuven says, Shimon, right, now remember, Reuven is holding the document, right? So Reuven says, I have a document, you've paid me back nothing. Shimon says, I paid you back half. Witnesses say, Shimon paid back everything. So what do you do in this case? So the Gemara says, nishba v'gova mechza menechasim menechorin. Listen to this. So what do we do in this case? Now both say, there's a number of strange things about this case. Number one, what's strange about it is that Reuven has the document. So generally, I both say, the way it works in loans is who has the power? Who has the power? He who has the document has the power. That's generally the way that it works. So, but on the other hand, there's eidos that Shimon paid back the entire amount. So what do we do? So again, so what's going to happen over here is that Reuven is going to swear that he has not received any payment. Harizeh nishba v'gova, right? V'gova mechza. So Reuven is going to swear that he did not go ahead and get paid. He's going to collect half. He's going to collect half. I will say, but listen to this, but he can only collect minchasim menechorin, from unencumbered property. In other words, so whatever property Shimon currently owns, he could collect from those properties, but he cannot collect from any properties that were sold after the date of the debt. In other words, so normally, remember again, when you lend someone money, you have a lien against their property. So technically speaking, you could even go ahead and collect from properties that were sold after the date of the loan, assuming there are no other properties. In this case, Reuven could only collect from unencumbered properties, not from sold properties. But he cannot collect from any sold properties. Why? The Amri Anan Aedim Samchinan. Because this is interesting. Why? Because anyone who bought properties from Shimon could say to Reuven, we're not giving you back anything. We're relying on the Eidim. And what did the Eidim say? That Shimon paid back everything. Well, if Shimon paid back everything, he owes you nothing. If that's the case, you have no claim to the land. So if we have witness, we're relying on those witnesses, and therefore we are not allowing you to seize any sold property. So if it happens to be that Shimon has other encumbered property, Reuven could collect 50% of the debt from those unencumbered properties. Incredible. So let's say if you take a look, good. So if look at the Rashbam, Nishba, Halova Shepara, Vipata Milishalem Mechza, Umechza Yishalim. Now, both say, so now listen to this. So now, Halacha Lamaisa, remember again, why is it that Reuven is entitled to collect half? Because at the end of the day, again, remember, I made a mistake. It's not Reuven who's swearing, I'm sorry, it's Shimon who is swearing. Shimon swears that he gave back half, and therefore, again, Reuven has the ability to collect the other half. That's what's unfolding over here. Has the ability to alova shepar v'ipatim. I'm reading the Rashbam. V'ipatim l'shalim mechza u'mechza yishalim lefi shekvar hoda da'adas baldin shava yosef me'adas edim v'gova hamalva mechza minachasim menichorin sheish lo l'lova. So we'll say, so again, so this is like a modim mechza's case, right? So therefore, again, so Shimon's going to go ahead and pay back the other half, but Reuven only has the ability to pay back the other half. Halacha l'maisa again from Nechasim mishubadim. So now let's listen to this. Va'afilu Rabbi Akiva Damar Meishiv Avei Dahavi. Okay, so we'll say let's at least begin to talk about this a little bit, and then Emir Hashem we'll have to pick this up tomorrow. So there's an interesting machlokes in Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Elazar. If you take a look in the Rashbam, it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the Rashbam. In the Rashbam, right, there's 2 dots there. The Rashbam says, Plukta to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. There's a machlokes, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. What's the machlokes? Betchilas shnaim ochsin, shtar shekasabo slain o dinarn. Now watch this, we'll say. So Reuven lent Shimon money. And in that document, it says, right, it says, I, Reuven, lent you slaim. Only one problem. Doesn't say how many. It just says slime. Now what happens? Malva omer chamesh. So Reuven says, I lent you 5 slime. Evelova omer shalosh. And the borrower said, right, Shimon said, you only lent me 3. So what's the halacha? Rabbi Shimon Elazar omer hol v'hodu mikzas hatayna yishava. So again, Rabbi Shimon says, it's modu mikzas, partial emission. What's the halacha by partial emission? What's the halacha? You have to go ahead and swear about the entire amount. Rabbi Akiva says, no, this is what's called meishiv aveda. Of course we believe Shimon. Why do we believe Shimon Abba say? Because according to the document, what's the most that Shimon would be obligated for? What's the most? 2. Because the basic definition of slime is 2. Shimon's coming along and admitting that I owe you 3. So that's already a tova. He doesn't even have to admit that. The fact that he's admitting that ultimately again caps liability. I don't want to rush this. We're going to stop over here for today. We're going to pick up with this machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon, loop it back to Rabbi Abba, and then Amir tomorrow we'll come to resolution on all of the Rabbi Abba cases. Shkoyach. Good morning, Mesh. I would say if anyone is able to help make the Shiva Minyan at the Wolf Shiva Home, 2018 Burdock Road. It's by the Green Gate, not right across from the quarry. Be much appreciated. They're starting to daven at 7 a.m.